Blue lights tore a seam through the night as tires hissed against rain-black asphalt. In the wash of a dashboard camera, a black man kept his hands visible, steady as stone, while a veteran officer approached with the swagger of someone too sure of his own power. The stop wasn't about a broken taillight. It was about a narrative the officer carried like a weapon: who belongs, who doesn't, who gets to move through the world unbothered. What he didn't know was that the man he was about to cuff had a badge too, one that didn't need a uniform to command authority. Before sunrise, a routine humiliation would flip into a revelation, forcing a city to look at itself and an officer to face the mirror he'd avoided for years. The man behind the wheel was named Marcus Hale, a quiet observer with a careful gaze and habits formed by a lifetime of staying 2 steps ahead. He'd grown up learning small rituals of survival, choosing well-lit gas stations, keeping registration and insurance in a crisp folder, memorizing routes that avoided the kinds of glances that lead to questions that lead to cuffs. By day, he worked in silence and precision, a federal investigator in plain clothes auditing corruption cases that rarely made headlines. His assignments demanded invisibility, the sort that lets you sit in a cheap diner and hear what no one thinks you're hearing. Tonight, Marcus was driving home from interviewing a clerk who'd hinted at a cash-only scheme tied to a local contracting firm. The rain softened the city into a silver smear, and the wipers kept time like a metronome for frayed nerves. He noticed the cruiser swing out without hurry, then drift into place behind him for a long, knowing mile. He checked his speed, signaled. Every lane change waited for the inevitable flash. Officer Dalton had built a reputation on swagger, first one on the scene, last one to leave, never wrong in his own telling. He was the kind of cop who thought instinct was just another word for prejudice with good PR. Lately, he'd been under quiet review, an unusual cluster of stops, too many that matched a single description, too few that led to anything real. He believed the city owed him obedience, and that the uniform was a shield against correction. When the lights finally bloomed, Marcus's body performed a choreography drilled into muscle memory. Pull over, hands visible, engine off, window down. He breathed once, slowly, and waited for the story to begin. Dalton approached, not with curiosity but with conclusion. This was a man whose mind arrived before his feet did. He scanned the interior, cataloged nothing but suspicion, and latched onto the folder on the passenger seat like it was a confession. Details blurred beneath the flashlight's cone, case numbers, initials, a bureau letterhead that rain was already smudging. The questions came clipped, then sharper, then accusatory. Marcus's calm was interpreted as insolence, his precision as evasion. When he reached, carefully, for the folder that would answer everything, the gesture was reimagined as threat. The officer's radio hissed with casual background chatter. The night seemed to lean in. Cuffs bit Marcus's wrists with a practiced efficiency, the kind done by hands that believed themselves immune from error. He was guided against the hood, chilled metal meeting warm skin, the red-blue wash turning, the scene into a restless bruise. On the curb, a pair of teenagers watched from beneath a bus shelter, their eyes absorbing a lesson they'd seen too many times to call it new. In the trunk of the cruiser, Dalton imagined a victory. Another stop that fit his pattern, another body to pin to a story. He missed the small details, the exact seal on the badge case in Marcus's jacket, the way the folder's tabs were color-co at the precinct, minutes fractured into procedures. Marcus didn't beg. He documented. Names, times, the phrasing of every instruction, the pauses long enough to be pressure. When personal property was cataloged, the badge surfaced, black leather opening like a hinge to a reality that shattered the room's hierarchy. The room chilled. A supervisor's face drained of color. A receptionist's fingers hovered over the keyboard as if the letters had turned to ice, The chain of command snapped into place with panicked efficiency. Calls were made. The precinct's quiet review of Dalton's record burst into the open under the glare of federal jurisdiction. Suddenly, the man in cuffs was not a suspect, but a colleague from a higher floor of the same building of power. Marcus said little. The seal on his credentials spoke in capital letters. Dalton's confidence faltered in stages. First denial, then indignation, then the tremor of recognition that the world he'd arranged to flatter his biases was rearranging itself without asking. The paper trail Marcus carried, audio logs, time-stamped notes, an internal memo about targeted stops, stacked into a mirror taller than pride. The cuffs came off, slow and ceremonial, as if the metal itself had learned shame. Dead with federal neatness, the quiet ferocity of someone who documented everything. What followed moved faster than outrage and slower than justice. An internal affairs unit, one that had been starved of teeth, found its bite under federal oversight. Body cam footage from dozens of stops emerged like ghosted confessions, revealing a choreography of escalation practiced on specific bodies in specific neighborhoods. Data analysts overlaid maps of citations with demographic patterns that had been whispered for years and now stood up as evidence. Community groups, long coached to temper their anger into respectability, felt the temperature rise to something that could not be shushed. Marcus didn't become the face of the scandal. He refused the mythology of the lone savior. He submitted his report, testified behind closed doors, and went back to work. Because one case doesn't cleanse a culture, and one officer's fall doesn't end a habit. Dalton faced suspension, then prosecution for falsifying reports and violating civil rights. The city issued statements written in the language of lessons learned. But the real learning showed up elsewhere. In revised training protocols, in supervisors who now examined patterns rather than anecdotes, in young officers who learned that instinct isn't truth without evidence. On a damp morning months later, the bus shelter where the teenagers had watched received a new light fixture. It was small, unremarkable, but it brightened the corner where stories too often went dark. Marcus drove past and didn't slow. He had other interviews to conduct, other quiet rooms to sit in, other ledgers to balance. The night of the stop remained a hinge in the city's memory, a reminder that power without scrutiny curdles into harm, and that accountability isn't a headline, but a habit. If a badge can be a shield, can it also be a mirror? And if we don't like what it reflects, what will we change before the next set of lights splits the dark?